I distinctly remember showing up in Boulder in 92. They had just won a co-national championship a few years before. It was a big deal, us going out playing Colorado in a non-conference game. Everybody knew about the mile high thing. I remember we get to Folsom Field and we go to the visiting locker room on the Friday before for the walkthrough. And all over the walls and the pillars in the locker room, it says, caution, elevation 5,400 feet. If you need supplemental oxygen, push here. The linemen saw that and were freaking out. And Coach Fry sees it for the first time too. And he's yelling at the managers, get those goddamn signs covered up. It was pretty brilliant on the part of University of Colorado to have some gamesmanship mind game like that.
Welcome to the Gallery and Hurley Unfiltered podcast, Iowa Football Rewind.
Subscribe now on YouTube or your favorite podcast player to get a behind-the-scenes look that you won't find anywhere else.
All right, we're excited to talk to Todd Romano, former kicker and punter for the University of Iowa, 1991 to 1995. Todd, great to have you.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's great to be here. Always love seeing my old friends and teammates and talking about Iowa and Iowa City. Appreciate you guys having me and looking forward to the next little bit of time I have with you guys. Always good to see you.
Talk about how you got into sports and go there if you would.
I was born in Houston, Texas in 73. My dad was in law school there. So he and my mom and my older brother Eric lived actually in a trailer in Houston. My dad was in the military right after law school, so we bounced around. We were at Camp Lejeune for most of the time where he was stationed. We're in Quantico, Virginia before that for some of his officer training. And then we were up in Newport, Rhode Island for his naval justice school because he was a Marine Corps lawyer. But he got out of the military and moved back here to South Florida where he had grown up. My mom's from Pennsylvania, but ended up moving to Orlando area, and they met up in Tallahassee when they were going to school. But anyway, ended up back in South Florida when I was about 4 years old. Started at a place called Sacred Heart Catholic School where me and all my brothers ended up going. My dad had actually gone to the same school back through kindergarten through 8th. Started playing sports from 4 years old and on. Started with t-ball and I couldn't get enough of it. And I was one of those kids that when I wasn't at practice or a t-ball game, I was out in the yard playing t-ball with my brothers. But growing up here in South Florida, it was kind of, thankfully, we're blessed with pretty good weather most of the year, other than the rainy season. Brian knows, living in South Florida now, but just bounced from one sport to another in my early years. It was Little League baseball, right into soccer, right into basketball, right into tennis, track and field. Never actually played football until I got to high school. Did some elementary school flag football, but I was a soccer, baseball, basketball guy growing up, and then did some travel soccer stuff, and I trended towards soccer. Actually, what I really wanted to do when I was young, I wanted to play for the New York Yankees. I thought baseball was going to be my route. I seemed to be trending that way, but then some things happened with our little league and it became disorganized and fell apart. And so I focused on soccer at that point in my middle school years. And then once I got to high school, the focus was went out for the freshman football team. So first time I ever played tackle football, and my focus in high school became soccer and football, and I think that's how I ended up becoming a kicker. So,
did you go out for football because you wanted to kick, or you wanted to play football? And
yeah,
you know what?
When the baseball thing fell apart, and I knew going that route, which was my intended route as a youngster, when I realized that wasn't going to happen, and I focused more on soccer and football. It was just my dad played high school football at Cardinal Newman, our high school. He actually played for the same coach that me and my three brothers played for, Sam Budnick, who's one of the legendary high school football coaches in Florida. He played football at Notre Dame himself. He was a Marine. But anyway, I went out. I wanted to be a quarterback. I was hoping to be a quarterback. I ended up being the backup quarterback. One of my best friends to this day ended up being our quarterback. His father was a teacher at the school, was a longtime legendary baseball coach at the school, but he also was an assistant coach on our football team. But freshman team ended up being a backup quarterback, so didn't play much quarterback. Ended up actually playing a lot of running back, which was funny for me, but I was mostly a running back and a linebacker on our freshman football team, if you guys can believe that. But our freshman team, I think we were the first team in the history of our high school. We went undefeated. We were 7-0. And then, but anyway, I didn't intend to be a kicker or punter. I just knew growing up, I knew that I had a leg. Actually, when I played soccer, I was just as good with my left leg as I was with my right leg, even though I'm right leg dominant. But somehow that translated over to soccer. But I remember as a kid growing up, I couldn't wait to go out for recess when we would play kickball, because I was one of those kids. I would just, whoever was playing right field or left field, I was just waiting for a nice slow roller, and I knew I was just going to kick it over everybody's head. So I had a knack for kicking. But anyway, we get to high school. It's literally a day or two before our first game, because you're not focusing on special teams for freshman football. But they're like, we need a kicker and a punter, so who wants to give it a shot? And I toiled around in the yard with kicking footballs and all that. It's obviously a different shape than a soccer ball, but I figured I could do it. And I had a leg, and I was able to kick a football. I was able to punt a football. So they said, you're the kicker and you're the punter. And maybe tried a handful of field goals in freshman football. It was mostly extra points. But then at the end of my freshman year, I got moved up to varsity just for the end of the year. They already had a good kicker. Actually, our kicker at the time, who was a senior at Cardinal Newman, he ended up going to Miami, the University of Miami, on a full ride. But then after freshman year, I moved up to varsity as a sophomore, was the kicker. Didn't punt right then, but then junior, senior year, kicker, punter. Also played some tight end, wide receiver, junior and senior year, and that was it.
That's funny you bring up kickball. I've got to interject with a funny story. When we were in school, we ended up doing like one of these camps for little kids. And so there was 3 of us, and it was myself and 2 other guys, I think a swimmer and maybe another athlete of some sort. And so maybe it might have been Willie Guy too, I can't remember. But we played them in kickball. So we played 3 against 30 basically. So it was like 30 little kids and 3 of us. And so one pitched, one played middle, and one played the outfield on our team. And then we just could launch the ball over their head playing kickball from our side. So we ended up scoring like 40 runs, and the kids were so upset with us. But made me think of that. Dive more into the dexterous thing. I guess don't ask me to spell that because I wouldn't be able to do that. But talk more about that piece of being able to kick. I guess it's crazy to me to think you could punt and kick both sides. So those in itself, I think, like kicking and punting is a different motion. And so talk about that and how you developed that, how you thought about it when you talk about that some.
It was unusual because I was right-footed, right-handed. I was a pitcher most of my time, or a lot of the time in baseball. But for whatever reason, as I started gravitating toward youth soccer and then club soccer, I ended up mostly playing left midfield or left forward. And I know Hurley's got a pretty significant soccer background himself, and we'll talk about intramural soccer at Iowa now that we can't get in trouble for doing it, but we'll talk about that later. But I just, for whatever reason, if you put a football on a tee and asked me to kick off left-footed, it would have been okay. It wouldn't have been anywhere near how far I could kick with my right foot. But for whatever reason in soccer, with the flow of the game, I had some sort of ability to use my left foot almost as effectively as I could use my right foot, just passing, shooting, even taking corner kicks, goal kicks. Sometimes I would do that with my left foot because it seemed like I could kick a soccer ball almost as far with my left foot as I could with my right, and could shoot the ball on goal almost as effectively and with the same velocity with my left foot as I could with my right. But it was weird. It didn't translate over to being able to kick left-footed football. I probably could have done PATs or field goals at a short distance with my left foot, but I never would have been a kickoff guy or anything like that. But for whatever reason, I could do it in soccer. That's probably some weird muscle fibers I have in my quads that somehow translated to soccer, but not necessarily football. But a funny story about using left, and we might have had a drink in the dorm back in the day, and I might have pulled out the old VCR tape like Diaco and Slutzker used to do their high school highlights. But I actually had a couple of punts in high school with my left foot. A couple of times, if the rush was coming and I felt it, I could sweep out to the left and punt the ball almost as effectively with my left foot. And then we had this thing in high school, and I don't think we ever did it in a college game at Iowa, even though we practiced it. And Hurley may remember this, but we would do an onside kick in high school where I would come up like I was going to use my right leg and then last minute shift and kick it the other way with my left. And I remember we did that in a game against Key West at one point, I think maybe my junior year in high school, but I distinctly remember because I was teammates with him, but a guy named Chris T. Jones. I don't know if you remember the name, but super great receiver. Actually, he went to our high school, which is literally right down the street from my office, but he was a year ahead of me, but he was a standout wide receiver, all-state, parade All-American. He ended up going to University of Miami on a scholarship. Later ended up in the NFL and had a few good years in the NFL before he had a horrible injury. But when Miami was up in Kinnick playing us in, what was that, 92? I think it was 92. Remember, right after Hurricane Andrew, I think they had just come off the national championship. Gino Torretta ended up winning the Heisman the year they came up and played us. It was like the first under lights night game, primetime ABC game, and at Kinnick. And we had played in the kickoff classic the week before against NC State in the Meadowlands. We lost, and then Miami was coming to town the next week. So it was really a hyped game. And anyway, we were down in the game, but I think we scored. And so we were doing an onside kick. And Chris Jones, my high school buddy, who knew I could use my left leg, I remember him over on the sideline, standing next to Mario Cristobal, and who was a coach? I think it was Dennis Erickson, but he was like, he can kick with his left. He can kick with his left. And it ended up being Coach Fry called just a straight up onside. So I did it with my right foot. We didn't get the ball. I think I dumb me. It probably went out of bounds or didn't go 10 yards or something. I can't remember, or they just fell on it. But I remember Chris yelling, he's going to kick it the other way with his left leg. I went to high school. So anyways, funny.
Some insider info then. That's awesome. Was that before the days of the kickoffs that they used to kick it into the ground and then make it bounce up, or the onsides?
Hurley and I spent a lot of time dabbling with how best to do an onside, because back in the 90s, we had that pretty thick grass in Kinnick. Word was Coach Fry was always a little bit concerned about cutting the grass too low because he wanted to slow down the speed of the Penn States and the Michigans and whoever's when they came into Kinnick. So it was always a little tricky because we would practice on our practice fields. We'd do our walkthroughs on Thursdays in Kinnick, but you didn't get a lot of time, dealing with the field in Kinnick other than in pregame and maybe a Thursday walkthrough. But Hurley and I and the other kickers, we were always dabbling. Do we leave the ball upright? Do we bend it back? Do we put it on the tee sideways and do one of those? But it was always tricky. But when you get that bounce where the ball just scoots across the ground and then, the tip of the ball hits just right and you get that bounce is always what you're looking for. It doesn't always happen, but you practice it and you try to do it. And when you do it, it's pretty satisfying. Wouldn't you agree, Brian?
Yeah. I think that technique was a little bit later because I don't think I could ever master that one where they would come in and knock it down and pop it straight up right away. I feel like that was early 2000s,
No, that's true.
late 90s or something.
A lot of people then started coming in and really coming over the top and getting that kind of high bounce right off the start. The technique back when we did it was you'd try to scoot it across the ground and get it at a decent enough velocity. And then at some point it would slow a little bit and then it would pop and you get that bounce right when it got to the 10-yard mark. But it was always a crapshoot. But when it happened, it was pretty satisfying. Now I see these guys laying the ball on the ground sideways, sometimes not even on a tee, and just doing all kinds of crazy things with it. But that's the evolution of kicking.
Did you have, so when you came into Iowa, the tee had already been taken away, right?
From what I remember, because
I'm trying to remember the year they took that away.
So my last high school, I graduated high school in 91. We could still use a 2-inch block in high school, but I think after my junior year in high school, I made all state, maybe second or third team all state. I started getting all the recruiting stuff and did a Ray Pelfrey camp and a couple other camps and all that stuff. And I was able to see where I stood with other juniors around the country. And anyway, to make a long story short, from what I remember, I think knowing that there was talk about them taking away a block for PATs and field goals in college that was coming, I went to a 1-inch block my last year in high school just to start getting prepared to kick off the ground. But I think you're right. I think the goalposts were moved in 90 or 91, and they took away the block in college. So if I'm not mistaken, I think 91 is when they did it. And I even remember getting up to Iowa City, and Jeff Skillett was a kicker at the time. And a few years before that, college kickers got to use the block and then they took it away. So it was an adjustment everyone had to make. And that was the other thing. When we played on turf or practiced in the bubble, it was, there wasn't a whole lot to worry about, obviously, surface wise, but Kinnick, especially as you got later in the year and it was chewed up a little bit on the PAT marks, Brian's smiling because he knows exactly what I'm talking about. And you'd have a little spitting rain in October, November, and the grass was a little bit longer. You really never know exactly what kind of footing you were going to get. And sometimes they'd snap it back to the holder and the full bottom third of the ball would be hidden in the grass. And you're like, oh shit, where's the sweet spot now? But part of the fun of playing in the Big Ten and kicking in different stadiums and different conditions and different field surfaces. But
I remember the winter as it got throughout the year, the surface would start getting cold, and then that became just like concrete, our practice field. So then that affects things too, because you're practicing like onsides and it works a little better on that hard surface. And then you go back to the Kinnick and it's soft and it doesn't do the same thing.
Now, you guys remember the practice fields. The defensive area was always a little bit softer and more level, but the area where we did special teams up on the upper plateau where the offense usually did their stuff, you remember that there was just there were hard parts and soft parts. And when we do our wind sprints across the field at the end of practice, you'd be stepping in potholes and all that stuff. So practicing there or practicing down by the sand pit by the bubble was always much different than once we'd go into Kinnick. And as kickers, was as psychologically messed up as we can be. Sometimes you'd be like, oh my gosh, we're going to have weather this weekend. It's November. It's cold. We've been practicing on basically a frozen tundra over on the practice fields, but Kinnick's soft. And So always those things you're thinking about and trying to eliminate from your brain before you actually go out there.
There's always some sort of thing to overcome, it feels like. Talk about the change of the tee going closer and ultimately on the ground. Is that a situation where your plant foot would be closer, farther back? And just like how that would affect you and like your kicking motions and those things, like how big a deal or how big of a transition was that?
Every kicker has their little idiosyncrasies and the way you do things and getting ready in the locker room, and you'd put in your pads the same way, and you'd put on your left shoe, your plant shoe before your kicking shoe, whatever we all did. But when it came to kicking, I was never really much of a technician. I don't really think. I definitely had my routine that I stuck to, but at the same time, I was one of those guys, maybe just with the soccer background, I was never like, where's the plant foot got to go? And maybe that's why I'm pushing something right, because my plant foot's over here. I was like, I'm pushing something right. It's just, I knew what I needed to fix. But so maybe that was a good thing. Look, my stats weren't great, but the bottom line is when you're confident, you're going to make everything. And Hurley knows what I'm talking about. And Nick, you know what I'm talking about. When you're hitting the ball right off your foot, Nick, everything is a spiral that's turning over. And it doesn't matter if a rush is coming at you, or if there's wind or weather or what. And same thing with kicking. I guess it's like golf, but when I was kicking with confidence, I felt like I couldn't miss. And then there's other times, and you're going out there and in your own mind, you're like, I don't know where this one's going. not a good mindset to have as a kicker, but it's funny because being a South Florida guy and always being active, always playing sports year round, and even my senior year in high school, junior and senior year in high school, my sophomore year when I got moved up to varsity, I was strictly the kicker. And so that took some adjusting for me to just sit on the sidelines and not be able to do anything else, and then only go in and kicking situations. But junior, senior year, I was playing tight end, wide receiver. I had a teammate named Napoleon Outlaw, who was a standout receiver. You guys may remember him. He ended up going to Michigan State and played for Coach Saban and Coach Perlis, and we played against him a couple times. But and we had other receivers. I was active other than on the defensive side. And then it was, it's fourth down. Todd, okay, you were just on the field as tight end or receiver. And now, all right, somebody throw me my block, and we got to get ready for a kick. So you didn't really have time to think about it. You just did it, and it was muscle memory. And I don't even think in high school at times I even took 3 steps back and 2 steps over. It was just get back like you're doing a goal kick in soccer. Just back up where you feel comfortable based on what hash mark you're on and the distance of the kick, and snap, hold, just kick it. So I was never real technical. I was definitely a little more technical in college because I was strictly a kicker, but in high school, because I was playing other positions and I wasn't just sitting on the sidelines waiting for fourth down and a chance to kick, it was more reactionary. But
you don't have a kicking tee or a kicking shoe? You just kicked in your football shoes?
And that's a great question. Even my sophomore year in high school, when I was just a kicker, I just wore cleats. But definitely junior and senior year, because I was playing receiver, I didn't have a kicking shoe that I changed into. I was just wearing Adidas or Nike cleats or whatever my buddies and I thought were cool with our uniforms. That's what we wore, and that's what I kicked in. And I never thought too much of it. Oh, if I had a kicking shoe, it would be different. I had all those weird kicking shoes from the Ray Pelfrey camps and all that stuff, but I didn't use them other than dabble in them and practice out in the yard. But so it was a little bit of an adjustment getting up to Iowa. The equipment room, we had all kinds of shoes and flaps over the laces and Copas and Reeboks and all kinds of different stuff. But being a South Florida kid, the biggest adjustment for me, and arguably my stats in college probably show this, but the warmer months of the year, I was okay. September, October, and we get in November, and when Big Ten weather starts coming in and it gets windy and cold, and those seem to be the times when I had my struggles. But when it was hot and humid in September, I felt like I was just at home in South Florida. I could come off the sidelines and most of the time make my kicks. But then Hurley and others had to bail me out plenty of times, other times. But so anyway, I hope that answers your question, Nick. But I wasn't a real technical guy. In college with kickoffs, I had my thing where whatever, I'd go my 10 steps back and a few steps over, but I had to worry about the play clock a little bit. I think I remember one time, I won't mention the coach. It was multiple coaches. Let's be real. It was plural coaches yelling at me because I think by the time I did my thing, squeezing the ball and getting it on the tee, the clock was already going, and I didn't even realize it was a game in Kinnick. I can't remember who we were playing, but I ended up getting a delay a game because we actually didn't get a kickoff in time. And I was like, oh man, backed it up 5, back it up 5.
It's pretty unusual.
Definitely unusual. It happened one time. I think it was my redshirt freshman year, but I can't remember who we were playing, but that didn't go over too well, as you can imagine.
Maybe that's a good transition to talk about recruiting and what schools you're looking at and how did you end up at Iowa?
Great question. In high school, again, we talked a little bit about it, but junior year, I'd had a pretty good year. I made all state and I started getting mail and all that stuff. And
did you have a 50+ yarder at some point, junior or senior year?
Junior year, I think maybe I think I had a 47 and a 42. Senior year, I had a 52 yarder. That was, I think, our high school record. But there started being some noise after my junior season when I got recognized. And anyway, I ended up going out and I'll get to the recruiting stuff, but I thought this was funny, so I'll tell it. But ended up going out did either of you guys go to any of the Ray Pelfrey camps back in the day?
I did.
So there was I really wanted to go to Colorado. I wanted to
kick 70 yarders, high altitude.
We could talk about the Colorado game here in a little bit later too, but I went out there to a Ray Pelfrey camp. We got to kick on Folsom Field mostly, which was pretty cool. But I go out there to this Pelfrey camp. I don't know if you remember the Florida State kicker that was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. He was from Aurora, Colorado. I think Scott Bentley was his name. He was a year behind. He was a year behind me, so he's probably in your guys' grade. But anyway, he was there at the camp, and he was already getting talked about and all that, even though he was probably a sophomore in high school. But anyway, he was there, and I was definitely competitive with the other guys that were there. Had a good camp. I can't remember if scouts were there or anything, but I remember when I got to camp and you're checking in and you're staying in dorms on the campus and you're a high school kid traveling alone. You don't really know what's going on and all that stuff, but I'm going to check in this. So I can't even remember what it was. I wouldn't call it a hot rod, but it was a souped up car to like a high school kid. But this guy pulls up next to me and is asking directions, puts the window down, and he's like, oh, I'm here for this. Are you here for this camp? I'm here for this camp. Do you know where to go? And he obviously was driving a car, so he needed to figure out how to park it, but ended up being that he was there to be a counselor. But I told him where to go and all this stuff. And as he's pulling away, I see that he's got this yellow license plate on the back that says Hawkeyes, and I think it even had his name. Everyone in Iowa City had those personalized license plates on the football team, Hawk number 82 or whatever.
Hawk 20, that was what my dad got for a
Yeah.
license plate.
So
Punt 46? No, I don't know what you're talking about.
I had a Florida plate on my car, and so I didn't have a personalized plate. But anyway, this guy pulled away, and it said Hawk and the number, or it said Fish or something. It ended up being Scott Fisher, who I didn't realize it till later, and got to Iowa City, and he's our punter. But anyway, he was a counselor out there, and I had no idea at that point I was going to Iowa. I was a junior in high school, but I do the camp, and it's pretty cool. I had a pretty good camp, and the Pelfrey team, it's so different now, but back then they were at least talking to you like they could help with recruiting and all that. So whatever, but it was cool. I was in Boulder. I really thought I wanted to go there. I was recruited by them later. I got to see Sal Nessi's locker and all that stuff because that was a big deal. He had passed away around that time. But anyway, camp's over, leaving camp. Again, I'm a 16, 17-year-old kid traveling alone, but whatever it was, like my parents had arranged for transportation back to, it was Stapleton Airport at the time before they had the new big Denver airport. So we go back there, and there's other campers on there, but my flight wasn't until the next day. And so we get back to dropped off at Stapleton Airport. And I'm like, what do I do now? My flight's not until the next day. And they were supposed to have arrangements or something like to let us stay in the dorm the next night. But when we were leaving Boulder, no, you can't stay in the dorm. So we just got on the bus and went to Stapleton. I was like, I'll figure it out from here. But you didn't have cell phones back then. You had to find a payphone to communicate with your parents. Anyway, there was another guy on the bus. He was a counselor there, but he was in the same boat because he was going to stay in the dorm, and then he was flying out the next day. But it ended up being Billy Hackett. I don't know if you remember that name. He was a Notre Dame kicker back in the 90s.
Okay.
Played with Todd Light and all those guys for Lou Holtz and all that. And he was a starting kicker at Notre Dame for a few years, and I was a good kicker. But anyway, he and I are basically sitting at Stapleton Airport because the Pelfrey folks just kind of shoved us out of the van and said, here you are. I can't remember. We got a taxi or something. We found some little podunk hotel near Stapleton Airport. He might have had a fake ID, or he might have already been 21. So we grabbed I think he found us a 12-pack of Coors Lights or something. We sat in this hotel room and just swapped stories about Notre Dame football and all that stuff all night. So it was pretty cool. I don't know whatever happened to him, but I remember following him, and he was a Notre Dame starting kicker. But anyway, that's my Ray Pelfrey Camp Boulder story. But get to senior year, had a good year, had a 52-yarder, made All-State again, made the Super 11, which was a big thing down here in Florida for Palm Beach County and South Florida, Brian. It's a pretty good high school football down here. So it was cool. I was the kicker punter for the Super 11, and we took the photos out on the beach, and half the guys in our photo ended up going on and playing in the NFL, and were D1 guys. But anyway, I just started getting recruited, and Iowa was one of a number of schools that were reaching out. I really didn't know much about them. I had been down to a game or two, or at least a game. I can't remember what year it was. It was either my senior year or junior year, but Iowa came down to play in the old Orange Bowl against the Canes.
1990.
So it was 90. So it would have been my senior year. So I went down to that game, but it was actually at the invitation of the Hurricanes because they were recruiting me. But when it was good Big Ten football, I seem to remember it was a competitive game, even though the Canes won. But as we got deeper into the recruiting process, I was able to start narrowing down what I wanted to do. I'll tell you this, I grew up as a Knoll. Early on in high school, I thought it would have been cool if I was going to leave the state to go to Boulder. We talked about that, but I grew up a Seminole. My dad was a parade All-American in high school and ended up going to Florida State, played football at Florida State. my older brother Eric walked on at Florida State as a tight end, so played for Coach Bowden. If Florida State had offered me out of the chute, I was going to Florida State. But
And they had all kinds of kicker problems for years,
yeah,
right? It was
yeah,
wide right and all those. It was the same time, right? Or was that
around
after?
the same time. I was a little bit after, but you're right. But they wanted another guy ahead of me. And so even though I'd done a number of unofficial visits there, because my family had season tickets, we went up to all the home games. I got to see Dion and Leroy Butler and Terrell Buckley and Brad Johnson and all those Florida State legends play in the late 80s and early 90s. Even when I'd go home for Thanksgiving at Iowa, we'd see the Florida State-Florida game if we weren't playing at Iowa on the Thanksgiving weekend. So I was at the game in 93 in Gainesville when towards the end of the game, there was a little dump-off pass. And who was the guy that played for the Buccaneers for all those years? Warwick Dunn took it on the sideline. Anyway, I wanted to go to Florida State, but they wanted another guy ahead of me. So I narrowed things down. But what I ended up doing, I ended up taking a number of unofficial visits, like to University of Miami, did a bunch of unofficials at Florida State when we'd be up there for home games. But Florida State never offered me an official visit or a scholarship until the first guy they wanted ended up committing and going to LSU. And then Florida State offered me, and I'm going backwards. It was after I signed my letter of intent with Iowa. So I was never going back on that. But in terms of recruiting, I narrowed it down to Georgia Tech, Florida State, Iowa, and Michigan State. My 3 official visits, I went to Georgia Tech. They just come off the co-national championship with the Colorado Buffaloes, and I guess that would have been 90. So I took a visit up there. Bobby Ross was a coach. Ralph Friedgen was there. Believe it or not, you probably know this, Brian, because we talked about it. Coach Hendrickson was there.
I was just going to ask.
You're just going to ask you the same thing. Yeah.
I
Coach
didn't know
Hendrickson
that.
was there and was pretty heavily involved because I think he was special teams coach at the time. So
Scott Sisson, right?
kicker there. But that was a big reason I didn't go there, because Sisson he had a lot of success and I think had a year or 2 left from what I remember. And it just wasn't the right fit for me, but had a great visit there in Atlanta. Had a great visit to Michigan State. Charlie Baggett was the guy that recruited me and my buddy Napoleon Outlaw. We did our visit together. Freezing cold in January or December, whenever it was when we did our visit. But I had a great visit at Michigan State. Another guy from my high school named Willie Hill was up there on scholarship playing. So we had a lot of fun. Got to hang out with Chuck Bulla, if you remember that name, crazy standout linebacker for Michigan State, and had a great meeting with Coach Perlis and all that. But my last of my 3 visits was Iowa, and I really didn't know much about Iowa. I can't remember if I did my visit to Iowa City in January, so it must have been just after the Rose Bowl. But Iowa didn't really pique my interest until as I was getting more heavily recruited by Iowa, and Coach Elliott was assigned to South Florida, but then Coach Triplett was pretty heavily involved because of the special teams. And then Iowa wins the Big Ten or whatever, and they're going to the Rose Bowl. And I'm like, holy crap. It's not Michigan or Ohio State, or Iowa's in the Rose Bowl. And so, of course, you're watching that. But I get a call on my landline at home on New Year's Day, just before kickoff. And my parents are like, it's Coach Elliott. And I don't know how they did it, if they had landlines or what, but talk about a pretty good recruiting thing to do. It's Coach Elliott, and he's basically in the tunnel before they're about to run out onto the field in Pasadena. And I was like, that's pretty damn cool.
That's incredible.
And I may be wrong. It may not have been right when they ran out. It may have been before the team came out for special teams. But the bottom line is Coach Elliott called literally within an hour or so before kickoff in the Rose Bowl. And you're watching that game, you're seeing it's competitive. You're seeing guys like Matt Rogers, and they're talking about him. He's a standout Big Ten quarterback. And anyway, so I did my visit in January. Had never been to Iowa, but I'm flying in. It was back when TWA was still around, and you'd fly to St. Louis and connect into Cedar Rapids. And I'm flying in from Cedar Rapids, and into Cedar Rapids, and I have this window seat, and you guys know this, but it's just nothing but flat white. There had been a blizzard or something. You can't see anything for miles. And then there's a farm here. And so I land, and there's 1.5 feet of snow. Mike Stoops picks me up from the Cedar Rapids airport. I can't remember who was with him. It might have been Bo Pelini. I can't even remember. It might have been Mark Stoops' brother, but Mike and somebody else picked me up. And we go into Iowa City, and I get to Iowa City, and just that entire weekend, I truly did fall in love with Iowa City and the campus. And Matt Whitaker was my host, my former Attorney General of the United States, but all of our teammates. He was my host, and just such a great guy. He already had plans to go to law school, and I was already thinking about law school because my dad's background. And just, it was a perfect weekend. But to have Whit as your host, he was so academically focused, but was also one of the 2 starting tight ends, and it was just cool. And he was such a great host. We had a great weekend. But saw an Indiana Hoosiers game at Carver. Saw Chris Street play. Bob Knight was literally right across from me. Didn't throw any chairs that night, but Bob Knight's there. Calbert Cheney and Damon Bailey, or not Calbert Cheney.
It's Calbert Cheney.
Calbert Cheney. Was it Damon Bailey?
Yeah, I'm not sure of that.
Anyway, yeah. But it was cool doing all the recruiting stuff and getting to go in the locker room at Kinnick, and they'd hang your jersey in there already with your name and your number and all that stuff, and put your name on the scoreboard. But had a great visit with Coach Fry, and it was a great weekend. But and back then you could only do a 48-hour official visit, but another huge blizzard came in that weekend, so I got snowed in. And I just remember Coach Elliott and Coach Triplett were freaking out because they're like, "Oh my gosh, NCAA rules," and but what are you going to do? If you can't fly out, you can't fly out. So I had to stay an extra night, and Whit's probably like, "Oh my gosh, I got this guy now for another night." And so we went and saw like Star Wars movie or something at the Englert Theater downtown, and then was able to fly out the next day. But I wasn't committed at that point. I think I narrowed it down really to Michigan State and to Iowa. I'd already ruled out Georgia Tech just because it wasn't the right fit. And we talked about Sisson, and I wanted to come in and play. I was even thinking back then, most people redshirted, as I ended up doing, but I thought, at least the way I was being recruited, I had a chance not to be kicker my first year, but maybe I could come in and contribute somewhere. And
I think punting was open, right, in that year.
I think it was up in the air.
It was, they were struggling for a couple of years.
Yeah, I think it had been pretty well documented that they had some struggles in the punting game, and Jim and Scott were there and traded punting duties from what I remember. Even Michigan State, it might have been Stoyanovich, I can't even remember, but Michigan State had a pretty established kicker. So I even though I was a little bit on the fence, I ruled that out because I wanted the best opportunity to play early. And so I was leaning Iowa, but I still was like, Florida State may offer me, but they were not sure what's going to happen with the guy they wanted first, who then ended up going to LSU. But anyway, Coach Fry, Coach Elliott, Coach Triplett come down to South Florida in January. I want to say it was mid to late January. Actually, when they came to our house, it was the night that rockets started firing and the Gulf War started. We had our TV on in the background, and Coach Fry, Coach Triplett, Coach Ellie, my parents, everybody was glued to the TV. As a kid, you're like, I'm not sure what's going on, but it was obviously a big deal. The Gulf War literally was like starting that night. But we go over to our living room area and we're sitting down, and I've probably told this story to you guys, and I'm sure everybody else recruited probably has a similar story, but we go sit on the couch. Coach Fry sits down and crosses his leg, and his pant leg comes up, and he's wearing his black ostrich boots that have a red rose on them and said like 1990 Rose Bowl. And again, you see that and you're like, that's pretty damn cool. I think I might be an Iowa Hawkeye. So again, I didn't.
The best investment you ever made.
Right.
But recruiting tool. But so I still didn't commit that night, but it was within a few days, talking to my parents, my family, made the call to Coach Fry within a few days of that, and said I want to be a Hawkeye, and signed, and the rest was history. And I was literally right before signing day. Then Florida State called. They said this other guy had committed and signed a letter, and so they wanted me to come up and do a visit. And again, I had already done unofficial visits. I knew what was going on, but even though lifelong kind of wanted to be a Knoll, I was obviously never going to go back on my commitment that I made, and certainly didn't even think twice about it. I didn't even entertain that I would come back on my commitment to Iowa and go to Florida State. But my buddies, who a lot of them went to Florida State, they kid me now. They're like, maybe if you'd gone there, things would have been different, because we had some problems with some wide rights while you were in the early 90s against the Canes. So got to Iowa, and then had the summer off, finished my soccer season in high school and all that stuff, and graduated. And I actually spent my senior year summer before going up to Iowa City working the John Carney kicking camp. You probably know John Carney, but one of the most prolific kickers in NFL history, played for the Chargers forever. I think was maybe with a couple of other teams later in his career, but he has actually graduated from my high school, Cardinal Newman, back, I think, in maybe 84. And then he was a kicker at Notre Dame, and then had a 20-year plus career in the NFL. I think was in at least one Super Bowl. But anyway, I worked his kicking camp that summer, and then it was time to move up to Iowa City once we got to August of 91.
Who was there? Skillet? Is he still there one more year?
So Jeff was there. He had one more year. Jimmy Hyzak was there. Scott Fisher was there. So I think they traded punting duties. I ended up redshirting my freshman year, but we can even back up if we want to talk about coming up there and meeting Slutzker and Diaco and all that, and roommate first time. But redshirt the first year. But Jeff, great kicker, had a great career at Iowa. And then Jimmy and Scott traded punting duties that year in 91. And then 92, I was competing for both the jobs, so we can get into that.
Let's rewind quick. It's interesting to hear you say that you didn't even think about going back on your commitment. I think that's changed a lot with this atmosphere. Yeah. And so to remember the same sort of thing, right? There's only one person maybe that you remember in the country that was like, oh, they committed and then they didn't go, and you were like, oh wow, that was cardinal sin to some degree. It felt like back then.
I felt the same way, and you're right. It was unheard of. Once you signed a letter of intent back then, that's where you were going, and it was really rare and shocking if you heard of somebody going back on a letter of intent. Obviously, even transfers back then, you were dissuaded from transferring. If you transfer within Division I, you had to sit out a year and all that stuff. But it never crossed my mind, and just the way I grew up. Anyway, it was once I committed to Iowa and talked to my family about it and decided that was the best place for me. There was no turning back for me. But nowadays, I mean, we don't need to get political or into the current college football landscape, but obviously it's just a different world with the portal and the NIL and the people making commitments here, and then the next day we don't need to get into that, but it's a different world.
You started into your roommate and kind of the guys that you hung out with, so that's probably an interesting story because you ended up with a couple characters as friends. Yeah. So it seems a little bit of an odd match to some degree. So talk about that if you would.
So on my recruiting trip to Iowa, I can't remember. I really don't remember who was on the trip, and I don't remember. Sometimes later on when we were all there and we were hosting recruits, you'd team up and there'd be 6 or 8 of you, and you'd go out and do the things over at Carver and meet with the academics and all that stuff. But anyway, I can't remember who else was on my recruiting trip that ended up coming to Iowa, but I committed. Back then there was no social media or anything like that. We probably got like a paper list mailed to us of who was the incoming class, and you could see who it was. And I don't think there were any other Florida guys. George Bennett was a Florida guy, I think. Came in our class, but
he was near you. How far away did you?
George, I think, was from Coconut Creek, so just between. Because are you in Pompano?
Pompano Beach.
Yeah, George is. Coconut Creek's 30 minutes from me, probably 20 minutes from Pompano, 20, 30, but Coconut Creek just south of Boca on kind of the Palm Beach County, Broward County line. But anyway, and as you guys remember, the policy for us as freshmen scholarship athletes back then was you had to spend the first 3 years in Slater. And anyway, I don't even know if I knew. I must have known before I got there, but we didn't have any say in who our roommate was going to be. From what I remember, I seem to remember the staff said, here's what we know about our incoming class. We're going to figure out what we think would be good roommate combinations and just put people together. And I can't remember when I found out, but eventually I found out, all right, I'm going to be rooming with Bob Diaco, a linebacker from Cedar Grove, New Jersey. And so I was like, okay, that's great. Poor guy's going to have to room with a kicker and punter. He's going to love that. But there were no other kickers and punters in our class. But anyway, we load up my car. My mom drives up with me, and then my dad was flying up that week, and I think he was in trial or something. We take a couple days, we drive up. We couldn't move into the dorm yet. We're staying at the Holiday Inn in town, which we pull in there and we're in the lobby. And I can't remember if some of the coaches were there. Well, we were probably checking in for football or to the dorm the next day. But I see this tall guy and this other guy, and we pretty quickly realized, okay, they're part of the incoming class, because I'd never seen Bobby before. I'd never talked to him from what I can remember. I didn't know what any of these guys looked like. And Bobby and Scott Slutzker, they definitely were not on the same recruiting trip, so I'd never met them, but they were both wearing fanny packs is what I remember, which I thought was funny. Hopefully they don't kill me for saying that. They would probably get a chuckle out of it today too.
There's probably photos of them with those fanny packs. So
I sure hope so. So I can.
It was leather too. I'm sure they were leather, so it's probably fine.
Bobby's definitely was.
Suede.
So.
Wait, that's East Coast thing. It's fine.
But I knew Scott was coming in as well in the class, and he was a standout, like Mr. Basketball, Mr. Baseball, Mr. Football in jerseys. So meet them for the first time, and actually it was great. I'm sure Bobby was still kind of, who's this kicker punter guy? Is he going to be cool? Is he going to be a dork? But we moved into the dorm and hit it off. Just, we had so much fun, not just football in the dorm, but Bob Diaco, Scott Slutzker, Derek Price, CJ, Lloyd Bickham, John Houston, all the guys that came in with me, Casey Wigman and Matt Purdy were just down the hall. And Wiggs went on to have incredible NFL career, Super Bowls, and Scott spent his time in the NFL. Bob, obviously, all the success he's had with in the coaching world. So it was an interesting mix, but maybe two Italian guys, even though one's a linebacker from New Jersey and one is this skinny kicker punter from South Florida. You know, we made it work and just have to this day a great relationship. We still text, we still see each other time to time. Bob and Julia have their home is over on the west coast of Florida, and so we've been able to go over there and visit over the years, every couple of years, and see them and their kids grow up and get our kids together. And every time I'm in Charlotte, I get to see Scott. Scott's been down here for a few conferences, so it's always cool to get together with Scott. I was out in Arizona not too long ago for expert depositions, got together with D Price. I was just like, it was like old times being in the dorm or the locker room. And you guys know, you did a podcast with Derek. Derek hasn't changed a bit. Right? The guy is still jacked. He can still play in the NFL. He does like Ironmans, and he swims across the English Channel and does all these crazy military boot camp competitions. So it's pretty cool. But the times in Slater with our incoming class were just some classic times, listening to Pearl Jam and Nirvana and Big Head Todd and the Monsters and all that stuff. And it was the good old days. But it was funny, speaking of the dorm, you guys were in the dorm, but
Only 2 years we had to do.
And Bob Diaco, and how when something bothered him, he was going to speak his mind. But after our second year in the dorm, or while we're in our second year in the dorm, and I think our room was 143 Slater, or it might have been 141 Slater. We were right there on the end at that back door that literally you'd go right out, and then the field house was right across the street. But Bobby was so fed up with the dorm that he called this like congressional summit meeting with Coach Fry, and Bobby was the spokesman for our class, the spokesperson. I don't think I was part of the meeting. Bobby called this meeting and he made his case and advocated, because Coach Fry was pretty set. He wanted people in the dorm for 3 years or structure, then you can move off campus. And Bobby was able to persuade Coach Fry to lift the 3 years. And after our sophomore year in Slater, we were able to move out. And Bobby and I moved into a place out off Mormon Trek and Cambria Court. There was a little park out there, so it was a great place out by Finkbine and out in that area. And then I guess everyone else benefited too, and they only had to stay in the dorm 2 years after that, so it worked out.
Thanks, Bobby.
We owe debt of gratitude.
I still don't understand the reasoning. It's unless it was team building, it's like I would much rather have a bunch of us separated than throwing us all together with nothing to do, a bunch of time, a bunch of bad ideas brewing. Like it was impressive how crazy that place got sometimes.
I seem to remember our first floor, I think it was all football. But once you got up second, third, fourth floors, I remember women's basketball team was up on one of the upper floors of Slater. But then there were other non-athlete students sprinkled out all around Slater.
I started like 7th floor, and then I came down to first floor.
Maybe that was it, but you couldn't park anywhere. So if you had a car, you couldn't park it. And we all had bikes, and some of the guys had motorcycles and all that, but you had to walk everywhere or go down those steps toward Hillcrest and wait to see if you could squeeze onto a CAM bus or something. But dorm life was fun in the off season for sure. So a lot of good times, a lot of good memories there, a lot of stuff that probably can't be shared. And unless Derek or unless the Diaco's lizard story has already been shared, then I'll share that, but I don't want to repeat. It's a pretty good one if it hasn't already been told.
I think there was some confusion from Slutzker on what happened to the lizard if it died. No, wait, what was he didn't know some part of that story.
I think he was confused on the type of lizard it was. I think somebody said it was iguana, someone said it was something else. So between two or three of them, we got the story.
Oh, okay. So it's
freezing and
partially
we
been
thought of
told.
that.
Okay. So who told it? Derek and Scott?
At least Scott.
I think maybe they both did.
Okay, I
Definitely
think they
Scott
both
did.
did.
Okay.
Yeah, something.
Do you want the quick version from my
Yeah,
perspective?
let's repeat it just
Yeah,
in
yeah,
case
sure.
someone missed it.
Let's see if it can be synthesized into one
Maybe we'll
cohesive.
get a full story finally.
All right. I even tell people that, like buddies of mine from high school, and I have people like peeing in their pants. So anyway, here's what I remember.
We'd like to take a quick break and throw a shout out to our friend Derek Price and Club Faction and the Faction Foundation. They bring NFL caliber coaching to life's playing field. Their 4-pillar system, faith, family, fitness, and finance, transforms average performers into extraordinary leaders. They don't just coach, they elevate. Find them at thefactionfoundation.com.
So it's a cold recruiting weekend, and we have an offensive lineman from New Jersey named Terry. I can't remember his last name, but Terry's in town. He ended up doing a commercial for Sprite later. He didn't come to Iowa.
Huge guy. Oh, he didn't?
If he did, he might have been there 1 year and then left, but he ended up becoming like an actor, or at least had a commercial. But anyway, Terry's there. He's this big dude. And he had this kind of slow talking, deep voice, as you would expect a guy that's 6'8", 350 pounds. So anyway, he's there. Terry from New Jersey. It was like, I'm not trying to disparage him, but it's like out of a movie. That's how they talk in New Jersey. So Terry's there. We're having this recruiting trip. It was right after Christmas break because we all scattered. I can't remember if that was Holiday Bowl year and it's when we came back, or if it was the next year when we didn't go to a bowl game in '92. But we all get back from Christmas break, and the dorms like locked down over Christmas break, and then they reopen the dorms and you're allowed to come back in after Christmas break. So before Christmas break, I'm backing up a little bit. I'm going home for the holidays. It must have been our second season, the season of '92, when we didn't go to a bowl game. I come home for Christmas break, and what was Christmas break back then? Probably 3-4 weeks, but you couldn't have pets or anything in the dorm rooms. But Bobby decides to buy a Savannah monitor lizard. It was not an iguana, it was a Savannah monitor lizard, because he was my roommate with Bobby. He lived in our room with us in a cage. So he buys this lizard. It's probably like this long with the tail. And another story is when he would feed the lizard, everybody would pack into our room. You guys probably were there for a few of them.
I think so.
But they ate rats. So Bobby and I, after practice and training table, we'd have to drive to this little pet store, and he would have to buy I hope PETA's not watching this or anything, but he would eat mice or rats or whatever they were. So he would have to buy 1 or 2 mice or rats, and the thing only ate once a week. That was enough to like sustain it. But you would buy the rats, and everyone was like, oh, it's feeding time. So everybody would come down, Matt Quest and Purdy and Lloyd Bickham and CJ, and everybody else on the floor would come in, and the rats would go in, and there would be this kind of standoff and fight. And eventually the monitor lizard would get the rats. And similarly, Matt Quest and Matt Klein, they ended up getting piranha. You remember when they had the piranha in a tank in their room? It was crazy.
Okay.
Nobody could have fish tanks or pets or anything. When everybody would leave and go to class, they would put sheets over the thing. So if the RA came in, no one would get in trouble. But everybody would come to our room when it was time to feed Bobby's lizard. everyone would go to Klein and Quest room when it was time to feed the piranha. And I think they fed it goldfish, and they put the goldfish in, and it was exactly what you would expect piranha to do, but I guess it was entertainment for everybody. But anyway, so Bobby's got this Savannah monitor lizard. I'm sure Scott already shared the name. Bob was a linebacker, so his favorite player was Dick Butkus. And do you guys remember the Jerky Boys?
Sure.
Back in the day, listening to the Jerky Boys. So the Jerky Boys CD of their little comedy prank calls was a huge thing. We'd all sit around the dorm and listen to that and crack up and whatever. So
Did they play that in the weight room at
I
times?
think they would even sometimes put it on in the weight room. They were those guys that would make the prank calls, and it was funny, childish stuff, but some of it was pretty damn funny. So anyway, the Jerky Boys were big at the time, and Dick Butkus was Bob's favorite linebacker football player. So his pet lizard was named Dick Butkus Jerky. So I don't know if Scott covered that, but so Dick Butkus Jerky, the lizard, is living in our room. Christmas break is coming up. Bobby couldn't take him to a pet store or anything like that. So Bobby decides, all right, if I'm gone 3 or 4 weeks, I'm going to give him enough food, but bottom line is we left the Dick Butkus Jerky in our dorm room. Everybody goes home for Christmas break. Invariably, somebody comes in and does an inspection over the Christmas break. Nobody's there. They see that there's a lizard living in our dorm room in Slater Hall. So whoever it was, they take the lizard to a pet store. We come back from Christmas break, and there's a note, or they notify Bobby that, hey, you can't have a pet. We've taken him to whatever store. You can pick him up here. Go pick up Dick Butkus Jerky at this pet store. It's early or mid-January. It's freezing cold out. It's a big recruiting weekend. So Terry, the recruit, is in, and Bobby or Scott or me or somebody must have been the host, because Terry was hanging out in our room. But Bobby and Scott go in Scott's truck to pick up Dick Butkus Jerky in his cage from the pet store, come back to the dorm, and he's in like a fish tank cage in the back of Scott's truck. And I think Scott had an old Bronco at the time, and they pull up in that little side lot of Slater Hall. I think they had to come in because we had to recruit. Anyway, they forget that Dick Butkus Jerky is in the cage in the car. So he's in the back of the car. At some point, Pete is going to, man.
It was the 90s. It was the 90s.
That's true. And I had nothing to do with it. But anyway, at some point they realize, oh shoot, Dick Butkus Jerky is in Scott's truck. We got to go get Dick Butkus Jerky. They go get him out of Scott's truck, bring him in, and what happens to lizards and iguanas in cold weather? They're like frozen solid. So they bring him into our dorm room in Slater, and Terry, the recruit, is in there. And he becomes like the mad scientist, or like young Frankenstein or something. And he takes over because we have a frozen Savannah monitor lizard on our hands and we're not sure what to do. And had the little sink in our room in Slater. I think they had out like a hair dryer or something, but they're running them under warm water. And we're like, gosh, I hope this poor lizard's not dead. But no reaction. Thing is stiff as a board. And Terry's talking in his New Jersey accent, and then at some point this lizard goes like this, and Terry from New Jersey is, Dick Butkus Jerky is alive. And so that's the Dick Butkus Jerky story. That's how I remember it. So hopefully there's some consistency with how others articulated it.
The name alone makes the story.
Right. I didn't get that part.
So
Yeah, that's a good addition. That's funny.
I think someone also mentioned he wasn't quite the same afterwards.
probably not. Probably had some neurological cognitive deficits. And I can't remember what happened after that. We probably had to get rid of the lizard. But then we got to move out of the dorm. Bobby and I moved out into a place. You remember Dr. Buckwalter, one of the team orthopedic surgeons, but he had a place out off Mormon Trek, and so Bobby and I leased that. And I think we were there for a year, and then Bob and Julie got married, and then so I moved out, and I think I ended up joining a fraternity. I think after the '93 season, I ended up joining the Pi Kappa Alpha House, and gosh, I think I lived on Johnson Street my last year with a couple of buddies in my fraternity house. I think I lived on over by Romeo, was it RT's?
Yeah.
Hurley, you probably had been there a few times, but
You were right there out by the
over
railroad.
the old library or the old post office. I don't know if that's still there. Back is that Gilbert?
I think
By the
so.
courthouse, and
The
but
brick building, the apartment
yeah,
thing.
the brick
Yeah.
building. You were there. Lived there for a year, but funny story about not real funny, but I just you know how some of the guys on our team, they grew up pheasant hunting and all that, and guys like Klein and Quest and Jeremy Trug. I don't know if you guys remember Jeremy. He ended up, unfortunately, he was going to be a stud and ended up having a horrible knee injury on scout team. I think our true freshman year, and I think he had a full knee blowout and had to have a full reconstruction. But him and Ian Davis and gosh, Driscoll, those guys were big into hunting and all that. But I come back from class one day, and you remember I had that old green Ford Explorer, and I had it parked out of my brick apartment in 94-ish or something. But I come back one day, and I'm coming around the little alleyway, just going up the steps into my little apartment. And I look, and on my hood, there is a huge dead pheasant on my hood. Somebody on the team, I'm assuming, was pheasant hunting and decided to play a prank on me. And I had a pheasant on me. When you have a big pheasant on you, what do you do with it? Do you just push it off? Do you put it? So I was like, oh man, who's filming me doing this? but
You skin it, pull out the feathers, and soak it in milk for a while. Then throw it in the oven.
I hunted a day in my life, so I didn't know what to do. It was probably JB, our God rest his soul, Jefferson Bates, probably my longest tenured holder and such a dear friend. So sad that he passed, but
I know. I was thinking about that. Him and Driscoll both passed. They're both holders.
It's I mean, my first year, Jim Hartley was holder, and he was phenomenal. And then you and I probably bounced through a lot of the same holders, but
yeah, we had Matt Ide, we had
Paul
JB,
Burmeister, B, Driscoll, probably 95, maybe a little bit. I can't. Who was the quarterback that came in my class from Massachusetts? Mike Dupre. But JB was my longtime holder. In fact, I guess
did
from
Sherman ever hold much? I don't think he did. I think he played pretty quick.
I think I remember he was a really capable holder, but I think they're like, once he was named starting quarterback, they weren't going to let him be exposed to that type of rush. But when JB was my main holder most of '93, and then so we'd go out. Is Shakey's Pizza still there? Do you guys remember that place out near Coralville? It was like
not anymore.
So it may not be there still. I think it was called Shakey's out by where the softball complex was. But
it was like a buffet pizza.
That was like buffet pizza. Yeah. But I would take JB.
I went there a lot.
And
of course he did. That's where that's where Chris Street got killed. I think it was right there, right?
No, that's at the other.
That was out by
Iowa City, like a Highlander.
That was out by the Highlander.
Oh, got it. Maybe I was wrong.
But I would take JB there on Thursday nights, and gosh, who was our long snapper then? Might have been Steve. I think it was Steve Bro. Steve Bro. So we would go there on Thursday nights, Shakey's Pizza, and that was always fun. But I just mentioned Chris Street. I remember passing him over by Van Allen that same morning, and then we're all at the dorm, and we start hearing the news, like, what? Chris Street has been killed in he just played a basketball game the other night against Duke and had the free throw record. And so obviously that was awful. And then more recent years, hearing about Ryan Driscoll and JB, and we had our O-line coach passed on the cruise. Remember that? And Coach Elliott coming to the dorm and having to tell everyone.
That was right before I got there. That
Okay. I
right,
think it was
that
on their spring
spring of
cruise.
the 90.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they were on their cruise between recruiting and when spring ball would start. And was it Coach O'Hara?
Because a couple guys in our class were recruited by him from Texas,
Yeah.
like Demo and
Yeah.
Said, I think, and D-Rob.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they said
he
that
was
they get switched up to another coach.
and he was such a beloved guy. And I remember the services there. Coach Fry, Mike Devlin, Ferroni, Scott Davis speaking. It was gut wrenching, especially for those guys who had been with them for all those years. But all right, what else do you want to talk about?
Let's get into some games, some like memories about games, good times, bad times. Go through that, Coach Fry, stuff like that.
Gosh, my first game was Kickoff Classic in Meadowlands, NC State. I remember the year before, spring Coach Fry taking a survey and said, look, playing in the Kickoff Classic, it's huge exposure for us, but it accelerates the schedule. We got to come in that much earlier for fall camp. But everyone obviously said, let's do it. So we did it. It was great. We were in New York City. Coach Fry, we got to have lunch at the downtown athletic club where all the Heisman portraits were back when they did the Heisman there. But a primetime game at the Meadowlands, you're like, holy crap, my first college game is at the Meadowlands where I see the Giants and the Jets play, and I've seen Lawrence Taylor and Phil Simms. So all that stuff, and you're in the locker room and you're freaking out a little bit because it's your first college game. But I was the starting kicker. I was a redshirt freshman. I got the job as a kicker, felt confident, and I just remember getting there. The winds were swirling. It was an August game. The next weekend was Labor Day weekend. The traditional first week of college football starts, but we were the primetime show that night for the Kickoff Classic. But I did kickoffs and PATs, field goals. I remember early in the game, I had a kickoff that kind of bounced, and then somebody ended up making a big hit, and I got pumped up. I was a kicker that wore my emotions on my sleeve a little bit more, just being engaged in the game. And I got all pumped up, and I came off the sideline, and Scott Fisher grabbed my face mask, and he's, you need to chill the F out, man. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know why I remember that, but I had a terrible pregame. And I just remember Mike Devlin was the long snapper for PATs and field goals. So when we were warming up at both ends of the stadium, Hurley, you kicked there. I think you did
later,
but when it was a turf field at the time, but just the way the wind swirled, and I was all in my head. My first college game, prime time, and just did not have a good pregame. And I remember Mike Devlin just calming me down. But anyway, kicked off fine, made 2 PATs, and then I had a chance. It was a close game. I think we were tied 14 all in the third quarter. Might have even been early in the fourth quarter, but I got a shot to try maybe a 37, 39 yarder from the right hash, and I just pushed it. And we had been driving, and we really needed that. That was tough to miss that first big kick. We ended up going on to lose the game, I think by 10. And I remember the coaching staff was concerned about me. I was like, look, I'm cool. It's one kick. It's happened to me all the time. It didn't shake my confidence at all, but I remember Coach Triplett kind of said Coach Fry is a little bit worried. But anyway, I think then Miami came to town the next weekend. Andy Kreider got the nod, did great. He kicked for a few games. We went out to Boulder. Andy played great. And then at some point later that year, maybe we had some struggles in both the kicking and the punting game, but I got another shot at kicking. I think I'd still been doing kickoffs. I can't remember if I did. I remember doing kickoffs in Boulder and all that stuff, but So I got the nod back for the Purdue game in 92. It was probably late October. Ended up going 3 for 3. I made my one PAT. It included a 47-yarder. Gave me some confidence. And then sometime around then, we ended up switching because we had some punt protection problems. Remember, we went to the old step back punt. Hurley remembers that.
Oh yeah.
I guess I was able to do it that year. So I think I punted 12 to 15 times that year. And
Did you take over that year with all punting, or were you switching with Fisher, or how did that?
now once I
up?
took over and we went to that jab step punt, whatever it was called,
The rocker.
the rocker, I punted the rest of the year. But again, it was maybe 4 or 5 games. I think I had maybe 13 to 15 career punts. But in our last game of the season, we played at Minnesota in the Dome. Thankfully, again, I didn't kick well later in the year when it got cold, but thankfully that game was in the Dome. I hit 2 field goals. I had 6 punts, including probably my longest career punt. But then the next year I had the job. Nick obviously came in, and I had a good spring after, I guess it would have been spring of 93 going in to my 3rd season. But then once Nick Gallery, who's on the screen, came into town, it was my punting career was pretty quickly over. So you guys had the punting from there. I think, Brian, you would occasionally do like some of the pooch stuff, right? But I kicked that year, started off good. The Tulsa game, hit the 53, hit 4 field goals.
I don't think anyone's broken that 4 field goal game
No,
individually.
I've seen we've had a couple.
Oh, maybe
at least have 4, maybe even
5,
a 5.
maybe
We've had so many good kickers the last few years, but and then hit some slumps. I missed my first kick of the year. Penn State came to town, the first Big Ten game ever for Penn State. Paterno's on the other side. It's at Kinnick. It's 93. I think I was already 5 for 5 that year. I made a nice one the week before at Iowa State, and a game we were dominating. And then I think Iowa State stormed back, and we only ended up winning by 3 or something. But anyway,
that was the windy game.
that was crazy. Remember that wind that game, just coming in that
Coach talked about that. It was
like,
the
yeah.
worst. So to make a field goal in that game, that's impressive.
And then candidly, I had some struggles, and to the credit of the coaching staff, they stuck with me. I made some kicks, including a nice one in a windy game at Northwestern later that year. That was a tight game. Then definitely had some adversity and had to grow up a lot, but Hurley is going to remember this, but Coach Fry's 200th win game. So what would that have been? The last game of the season at Kinnick against Minnesota, going for Coach Fry's 200th win. And I missed 2 or 3 kicks that game, and I got booed off the field. And I remember Coach Fry coming over saying, because he was always very supportive, and so was Coach Elliott, but I let the team down, and but came over and said, look, we got to make the change. And I said, Coach, I totally understand. I'm sorry that I let you down and let everyone else down, and let's go win this game. But Hurley came in and ended up kicking the bowl game and made a boomer in the bowl game for what I remember. I know the bowl game didn't go our way. We played that tough Cal team, and they had a kicker that ended up going in the NFL. But yeah, we played the first.
Yeah, Doug Brion.
That's right. I can't believe you remember that. But
I ended up doing some business with him after that.
Oh, you did? Okay. Yeah, he was good. I
Yeah.
remember chatting with him a little bit. And he was a really good college kicker, but
Nick worked with them too. Not that long ago.
I worked for one of his businesses for sure.
so that was tough. It was definitely a time that, and let's face it, I think we would all agree with this. Adversity in life, I think, makes us who we are. And I thank God every day that I've learned more from the losses and the adversities than I have from the successes and whatnot. But that was tough. You go from the starting kicker, having a pretty decent year, to boom, all of a sudden you're second guessing yourself, you're lacking confidence. You make some big kicks, but then you miss some kicks and you let your teammates down. So I'm never going to say it was in a dark spot, but it was tough after that. But Hurley and I always maintained a great relationship, and gosh, how much time we spent kicking together,
Yeah.
working out in the weight room together, that became great friends. And he and I were both competing for the same job. And you remember 94, it was kicker by committee. I got the job back to start the season. It went okay, but then I went right back into having some issues. And when Brion came in and kicked great, you didn't really know.
That was the end of the year, I think. You
didn't.
Towards the end, maybe.
I can't remember. And you didn't really know from week to week who was going to get the nod. It was whoever's kicking the best this week, PAT, field goals, kickoffs, is going to do it. We split duties.
Oh, that's right. That was the
94.
You were there the first couple games, and then they switched at the Oregon game.
Yeah, that's right. Because I remember I kicked against Iowa State. I made a nice kick. I'm sure we had another non-conference game. I made a couple, but then I remember I missed a couple of chip shot kicks. And then we went out to Eugene. And how cool was that, playing in Eugene? Other than the flight out there, was just, it took 17 days, it seemed. But and Nick, you were the punter at that point, so you played in Eugene. But 94 was up and down, but Hurley fully supported me when I got the nod, and I fully supported Brion, and we found a way to help the team on special teams. I'm sure the coaches didn't let us kick much that year, because Brion always came and bailed us out. And then 95 was again kicker by committee.
So you kept beating me out all the time. So I don't think I ever beat you out in practice and during the year. It was always, they just made a change later, but
I mean,
you're always the better kicker.
If I was kicking decent in practice, it certainly never translated to the games, and that was my problem. But so we kicked by committee. I remember I missed 2 PATs in the same game against Iowa State that last year.
It was after you replaced me. So I got benched in the game because I slipped and missed my PAT, and then I pushed a field goal. Then you came in.
I came in. It was windy as hell again.
Yeah.
I remember kicking to the north, and Driscoll was a holder. I missed 2 PATs.
But you hit a field goal though, right? A long, like a tough one.
I just remember it was windy. I don't think it was real long, but I remember it seemed to hold up in the wind. I was like, don't even tell me I'm going to hit a chip shot short. Thankfully, it just barely went over instead of barely. But then Brion ended up doing great, made some long kicks that year. The bowl game.
That's when
Brommer came in, but you were the long field goal guy. And
I kept doing that.
You guys carried us. And obviously, Nick was still booming punts. I think I was still helping with some kickoffs in and out of 95. And then Brion even took over the kickoffs. But then we had the bowl game, the Sun Bowl. And I remember one of the first plays from scrimmage, Cedric went right up the middle, and we never looked back. You and Brommer were like 5 for 5. I think you hit a couple of bombs in that game. And then I know the next season, watching you guys, you had continued success. So I hung up my cleats and then ended up going to law school, and then ended up going into the Marine Corps, became a Marine Corps officer, judge advocate, JAG lawyer, but took my cleats back out of my mesh equipment bag from our good old equipment manager in Iowa City. I probably sniped one of the mesh laundry bags and kept my footballs and tees and cleats in them. But our battalion ended up having there was a tackle football league throughout the Marine Corps. So of course, once they found out I kicked at Iowa, I got recruited to do that. So I'm like the only officer on the team. That's a bunch of privates and lance corporals and sergeants, and I'm this officer captain who ended up being the kicker. But it was full. We had full gear, referees. It was tackle football. We ended up winning the battalion championship and I went 6 for 9 on field goals
Nice.
for my battalion team, and we won the, I guess, the Western Region Marine Corps championship, and I think I had like a 44-yarder was my long, and then that was it. Then I really hung up the cleats for good.
Did you try to get back in as a tight end or a running back? No?
Not to knock the football there, like the guys now that you run into, that if you're playing like in an adult softball league and they want to come in with their cleats towards your shin at second base, like it was such bush league football. And if you're an officer playing football with a bunch of enlisted, you've got a target on your back. As a
Take a shot at
kicker,
your boss. Yeah.
as a kicker, you're out of the woods. But and actually, there was another officer buddy of mine who was also a Marine Corps lawyer. He was my holder, so that worked out. But you don't want to be a lineman or in a pile in football like that, where it was a bunch of guys reliving their high school years and trying to show each other who's boss and who's still tough. And you got Marine mentality going with it. Not a good combination. So I'd run on the field and kick and then run off the field as fast as I could.
That's amazing.
Those were the
Did your dad and Hayden hit it off pretty well then?
I think just with the whole Marine Corps background, definitely. My dad really enjoyed talking to Coach Fry when my parents would be up in Iowa City, and certainly when they were in our house, they probably stole the conversation talking about their Marine Corps days and all that stuff. But it was definitely a good fit. And just with all Coach Fry's psychology stuff and the pink locker room and the raised up benches, so you couldn't, if that was true or not, I don't know. But in addition to the pink locker room, and I'd always heard that the visiting locker room, that the benches were slightly higher so that certain people, if you were a certain height, your feet would dangle and wouldn't actually touch the floor and make you feel short. Is that true?
I hadn't heard that.
Hear that?
No idea.
Okay.
It doesn't surprise me, but
I don't know. That might have just been a myth. We all know about the pink locker room, but I had always heard that Coach Fry intentionally had the visiting locker room seats or benches up a little bit higher so that your feet couldn't touch the floor unless you had to scoot down a little bit, which I thought was brilliant. But
That's hilarious.
But the psychology stuff, I don't know if you guys remember this, but Coach Fry was always very superstitious, and if he wore the white pants in the first game and we won, the white pants were being worn every game. We all had things like that. But I distinctly remember showing up in Boulder in '92, and they had a good football team. They had just won a co-national championship a few years before, but it was a pretty big deal us going out playing Colorado in a non-conference game. But everybody knew about the mile high thing. In the NFL, if you went out and played Denver, you'd always have to be concerned. If I have a long run, I'm going to need oxygen. But I remember we get to Folsom Field and we go to the visiting locker room on the Friday before for the walkthrough. And all over the walls and the pillars in the locker room, it says, caution, elevation 5,400 feet. If you need supplemental oxygen, push here. And I remember like the linemen saw that and were freaking out. And we walk into the locker room and Coach Fry sees it for the first time too. And he's yelling at the managers, get those goddamn signs covered up. We come out while we're getting ready and changed over from our flight to do our walkthrough. The managers are putting brown butcher paper up over all the caution, high altitude, beware if you can't breathe, push here if you can't breathe. It was pretty brilliant on the part of University of Colorado to have some gamesmanship, mind game like that. So
That is impressive.
almost as like the Michigan State visiting locker room. The mental
just
torture
remember,
with that.
like, it's probably their visiting locker room was probably no bigger than my office here, and had the open toilets and just talk about a mind game. Ohio State was very similar from what I remember. And you'd walk in on the day before for a walkthrough. It was like, we were like 6 to a locker. There was nowhere to change. It's brilliant to do that as a home team for the visiting locker, because you're already on the road, you're in a hostile environment, and you don't even have room to put your football pants on because it's so tight in the locker room, and everyone's trying to use the bathroom and all that stuff, and the 2 toilets and no stalls. And there was a lot of Marine Corps in those locker rooms that I later experienced and found out from the
Wow.
Sparty and Buckeyes locker rooms.
That's funny. I want to go back a little bit. Thanks for walking through kind of the ups and downs of your career. I know it's, I'm sure, interesting to look back for you. I think there's an oversized sense of responsibility to some degree for specialists. That you said you missed a kick and then we lost by 10. So it's really easy to go down that path of saying you were the reason they lost the game, right? There's 80 some plays for offense and defense. And I guess it's a game of momentum and those things, but I think it is really easy. You have so few chances. You're just like, okay, if I'm not perfect, that this just is, or at least for me, was easy to just be like, oh, that was a waste. I'm 3 for 4. And you can hang on to those things pretty easily and let that kind of long-term, I think, maybe affect your performance. And you don't get a chance to go back out and fix things or do something different. You at some points have to live with some of those things for week to week and all that.
No, it's a great point. And look, you guys were special teams players. Nick, obviously, you played some tight end as well. Your perspective is probably a little bit different, but from a pure punting and kicking standpoint, look, you guys went through it where you're second guessing yourself and you're not kicking with a lot of confidence. And it's, oh, where's this next kick going? And once you start thinking that way, you get in your own head. And I always looked at kicking like physically. I felt back in the day, you give me any situation and I can do it. Unless you're asking me to kick a 75-yarder or something, it's not going to happen. You just physically can't do it. But if you put me in a situation and I'm kicking with confidence, I remember Coach Fry before the 53 at Tulsa, before the 47 against Purdue. I got iced a couple times, never like it on the last play of the game, but I remember an Illinois game in Kinnick. It was the last play before the half and we were getting crushed, but we went out and I tried a field goal and they had 3 timeouts and they used them all. And we go over Coach Fry, he'd always say something funny. And when you were kicking with confidence, it was like, Coach, I got this. And you truly believed it and felt it. And usually you did. But there were other times when you're like, you're just not kicking with a lot of confidence. And mentally, physically, it's an easy kick. But when you're not kicking with confidence, it was like you could spray the ball up all over the place. So it's weird. But you bring up a great point. It's like watching Michael Jordan back in the day. He could go off for 50 against the Utah Jazz in a game. But if he got that shot at the last second and that one bounced off the rim and they lose the game by 2, Michael Jordan's mentality, it's like, I let my team down. We're like, you went for 50. You had a playoff record. I missed the last shot. And that's when it mattered. And that's what everyone's going to remember. And so I always thought like that, and look, everyone says that. But it's not one play. Somebody misses a block. Quarterback throws 3 picks. Running back fumbles. But look, we're all kickers. We had very few opportunities to shine. And so when it was our time to shine, those were the times where we took pride in coming through and supporting our team and not letting our team down. And you guys know this. When you miss it, it's gut wrenching. First of all, you shouldn't miss one, but it happens. But when you could be up by 60 points, but you miss a PAT, it's an awful feeling because you just think, all right, I get so few opportunities and I have done the repetitions thousands and thousands of times. And you just you think it should be automatic. And so when it's not, you really take a hard look at yourself. But I never looked at it like, oh, that's okay. I missed a kick because we had 4 picks in this game and our defense gave up 400 yards passing. And so everybody else screwed up too. It was like, look, and especially as a kicker, where all the exposure is on you, like it is with a quarterback. No one sees missed blocks. No one sees left tackle whiffing and diving in the ground while the DN comes up and crushes your quarterback from the backside. They just see, ooh, that was a huge sack, but they don't really see that that the left tackle just blatantly missed a block. But we all took pride in what we did, and just from a pure pride standpoint, you wanted to perform every time you're on that field and not let your team down. And the way I looked at it is, look, if I missed a kick, you don't see this much anymore. Sometimes you see it in college, but a kicker will miss a kick and then they show it on replay. Perfect snap, perfect hold, and the guy just pushes it. And Brian and I know enough about the mechanics of kicking. You can see he just didn't hit it well. You can tell it was going to be a push or a hook right from the start. And then they look down at the holder and there's this as if, that was a bad hold type of thing, or you didn't get the laces around. If I missed the kick, I missed the kick. The 9 other guys on the line did their job. The holder did his job. I just didn't do my job. And that's the way I always looked at it and internalized it and said, because we prepared for it. Brian will laugh at this and so will Nick, but maybe not necessarily as kickers, even though we practiced that, but how much time after we did special teams, Brian, would you and me and our other punters be over on the side with Coach Longo, and he'd be throwing us bad snaps left and right, and we'd be diving for the ball and pick it up and try to get the punt off. You prepare for that stuff, and there's going to be bad snaps. The ball's going to be wet. There's going to be snow and ice on the field in the Big Ten. And so you would prepare for that. And if I missed a kick, I never remember ever saying, shoot, if Steve Bro or Wigman didn't roll that one back to the holder, I definitely would have made it. That stuff happens. You take a stutter step, you regroup, and you do it. But I was always the first one to say, I got to be better when I didn't perform. And there were plenty of times when I didn't perform, but I always at least tried to pride myself, especially when I had adversities, that it's one kick. There's nothing you can do about it now. I tell my kids that all the time when they want to look back at stuff and shoulda, woulda, coulda. You can't cry over spilled milk. When something happens, it happens. There is zero you can do about it other than learning from it and trying not to make the same mistake down the road. And I was always at least trying to look forward. And when I lost my kicking jobs, my mentality was, I got to go and earn it back. And there were times I did, and still. And then when my performance fell below standard and I lost my job, I said, what am I going to do? And just sulk about it and pout about it and say, life's not fair? No, life is going to throw all that kind of stuff at you, and you bounce back and you just say, there's no shortcuts, and you go and you try to win it back, and at least do everything you can to fight. And I think that's the mentality that, that at least I had. I know I spent plenty of time with you guys in Iowa City. I know that's the mentality you guys had. And look, the Big Ten is not the easiest place to kick or punt. And, all of us have had our own successes and failures in football at Iowa and elsewhere, but you fight through the adversities, you learn from them, and you move on, and you just keep fighting.
And I think
it's interesting. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to add on that last part, that I think that's why it was easy to be close friends, because it was never really, oh, I hope Todd does bad, or
right.
It was just like, it's up to me to beat him out. If I'm not good enough, then Todd needs to play. And if he's better, then that's good for the team. And if I want to play, I better figure out a way to beat him out. And so there was plenty of times during practice we missed enough kicks. There was always more we could have done. It's not like we all were perfect all year. So you can always look back and say, I can be way better. And you see the other person working just as hard as you. It's easy to like root for people, and you get to know everyone. And so there's no real competition. It's all competing with ourselves. And you like the guys you're teammates with. So at the end of the day, I think we all come down to, if whoever's gonna help us win, that's what I'm here for. And if I'm not good enough, I better get my ass working out until I can compete and win the job.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Look, you and I would pretty much spend most of the time on the sideline together, kicking in the net. If you were up, I was holding for you. I was the first one to give you a pat on the back and say, let's hit it. You would do the same for me. And let's face it, we both wanted to be out there. There's no doubt about that. I wanted to be the guy. You wanted to be the guy. But if I wasn't the guy, I wanted you to have success, because obviously football is a team sport, and that's what it's all about. But I think that the good thing about our relationship, Brian, is once you came in, gosh, you and I spent a lot. We were roommates on the road. We were roommates at the Hampton Inn and the old Holiday Inn or whatever it was in Cedar Rapids before home games, before we moved to the Hampton Inn in Coralville. Not to mention all the time we spent away from football, but after special teams.
Working out.
I mean, you and I, there were others that would go right to play the PlayStation in the lounge. You and I were lifting together, just trying to get better in the weight room. And
then we'd play pool afterwards.
Yeah, right.
We were probably, other than Nick, we were probably the two most jacked kickers in the Big Ten back then. But
genetics, all genetics.
Nick could probably still deadlift like 600 pounds like you could back then. But you and I would go in there, and we're kickers. We're doing power cleans and stuff like that. But it was all to get better and support each other. And that's what it's all about. And not to mention our intramural soccer. I
forgot about that.
I think the whole world who's watching this, because I'm sure there's millions, needs to know we made a little bit of a run our last season at intramural soccer. We might not have won the championship, but I know we got to the championship game. I think we had to play some fraternity. Did we win the intramural championship, or did we finish second? I think
we definitely won one. I don't remember if it was the year after you
Nipper was our goalie. Tavian played with us. Brommer played with us. D. Price was our goalkeeper a few times, but and Coach Fry and everybody frowned upon intramural soccer because you tear an ACL pretty quickly playing indoor soccer, because we did it in the bubble at nights in the off season on the turf. But once we got brave enough to be like, we don't really care, we're going to do it anyway, we had fun because we all had such a soccer background, and we made a run, and I guess ended up winning the intramural championship in probably 94 or 95, somewhere in that time frame.
Yeah, maybe we got pretty far in that year, and then maybe it was the next year, because I think I saw Tavian sent me a picture with Kevin Casper and Alexa Rodopoulos, or maybe someone, other guys. So maybe that was the team we won.
Okay.
But anyways,
that might have been after me. Actually, it's funny, you might have put this on, but there's maybe it's on your website, the Hawk football thing, but there's a YouTube video floating around. I think it is under your name, but it's as of us playing an intramural soccer game in the bubble, like in 94 and 95. I think you scored a goal, I scored a goal, but it's you, me, Brommer, I think Tavian, running around in our old Umbro shorts and our Adidas turf shoes. So pull it up if you. I'm pretty sure it's yours. I think
a link.
your parents may have filmed it, but anyway, it's out there in the public domain somewhere. So
nice.
I can't believe we got away with that. That's funny.
Same with the basketball. I don't think we were supposed to play basketball either, but a lot of guys did.
Oh, there were some epic basketball games in the field house. But I think we were talking about this on the Zoom we did a few months ago with the kickers. Bobby had the team and had the t-shirts made, and it was like him and Harold Jasper, and Slutzker was like dunking on people. He was Mr. Basketball. He played against guys that ended up going to Chapel Hill and Duke and ended up in the NBA. And I mean, those guys were fun to watch. So do you guys get back to Iowa City much, or?
I get back a little bit. I think I went back. My brother got inducted like into the Wall of Fame.
Oh, I saw.
I got his recognition for being in the College Football Hall of Fame and stuff like that. So I'd jump around some of those games a little bit here and there. That's off and on depending.
I try to get back once a year at least. It doesn't always work out with a football game. At least twice a year, usually I get back. All my family's still there.
That's good. We've seen several of the Florida bowl games over the years, including, might have been colder than any Iowa game I ever played in, but when they played in the Orange Bowl with Stanzi and 2000.
You were at that one too?
Yeah, were you at that game?
Yeah, I was.
Remember how cold it was?
It was so cold.
It was probably the coldest,
probably like 45 degrees in
Miami. And it was windy. It was windy down there at whatever it was called then, Joe Robbie Stadium, and now it's Hard Rock. When they pummeled Georgia Tech, it was unusually chilly down there. But I saw a few people at that game. But we got into some of the Iowa bowl games, but we've taken our kids up to Iowa City a few times in the off season just to see the campus. And we still had family in Des Moines for a while, so we'd pop over and do a day in Iowa City and go eat at Mickey's or hit the airliner or places like that. But
was that your hangout in school?
Not really. We all went to the same places. Most of the football team worked at Sports Column. Ilima, Matt Ide, I think Scott Davis, plenty of others. But Sports Column early on was the old field house, definitely the airliner at times, but a lot of good memories from Mickey's and RT's. And then I saw something the other day that I think there was something about best concerts or something that have ever come to Iowa City. And at least on a couple of the lists I saw, I was at like 3 or 4 of them, which I thought was interesting. And maybe you guys were too, but I remember Guns N' Roses came to Carver. Like
that was my first concert ever, 92.
92, 93.
Maybe 93, that was it. Because somehow they kicked the women's basketball team out of the first round game, and they had to go travel because that was already pre-scheduled.
Oh, geez, I didn't remember that.
I had just read that recently. That's what happened, but so that would have been 93.
But I remember that was a great show. They played like an electric set and then came back and did like an acoustic set on a couch. I was like, how cool is this? Guns N' Roses at Carver. And then Metallica was there a little while later. I think Garth Brooks was there a little while later, but the biggest one was, and I probably told you this, but Smashing Pumpkins I loved that band. And Big Head Todd and the Monsters was probably my favorite band. And Hurley and I've now been to a few Big Head Todd concerts.
You got me hooked on them. You got me hooked on them.
In Orlando, Hurley and I've hung out at a few Big Head Todd concerts, but first time I saw them was at the Iowa Memorial Union, I think in 92 or 93.
Wow.
And it was on a weeknight during the season. And remember, Coach Fry had team rules. You couldn't be downtown or anywhere except for Saturday nights. And half the Saturday nights during the season, we were traveling, so you couldn't go out anyway. And we didn't want people getting in trouble and all that stuff. But it was like a Tuesday night, and Big Head Todd was playing at the IMU. I asked him and got special permission. You obviously couldn't drink or anything. We had the team rules, but he said I could go. So I saw Big Head Todd for the first time back then, and I've probably seen him 75, 80 times since then, including a few weeks ago at the House of Blues in Orlando, where Hurley and I've seen him a couple times and hung out and had some drinks. But Smashing Pumpkins, they just released Siamese Dream in, I think it was 93. So it's summer of 93. I was up there taking classes for the summer, just working out. And There was no social media back then. And you remember the Brugger's Bagels is that Van Buren over by Van Allen Hall?
Yep.
Still there, I think. At least last time I was in Iowa City, it's still there. But back when they would like put postings on a cork board when you'd walk into restaurants and establishments, and it was like, you need to sublease an apartment, pull this little tab and call this number. There was this like thing on there, and it was like Pumpkins tickets and Brugger's, and I was like, that's weird. And again, you didn't have the internet, you didn't know who was coming in concert unless it was publicized around the campus. But anyway, I saw Pumpkins, and then I guess I started asking around, or maybe called the number or whatever. And sure enough, the Smashing Pumpkins had just released Siamese Dream, which I was a big Pumpkins fan, so I was really looking forward to it. And they're a Chicago band, so had just released Siamese Dream. They're leaving Chicago. Literally, their first stop on their tour after they left Chicago was Iowa City, and they were playing at Gabe's. Like, Gabe's has had some crazy shows over there. I think I heard Led Zeppelin might have played there, or maybe played at the Union way back. But anyway, Iowa City was such a great town. We had all kinds of great shows and arts and stuff. Sure enough, Smashing Pumpkins were coming there before they were huge, and literally a month after they played at Gabe's, they were everywhere. But they come to Gabe's. I think it was like a weekday night, but I go to Gabe's. You couldn't get a ticket because it was sold out, because everyone else was already starting to hear about them. So I think I was having some drinks at the sports column, and then I popped over to Gabe's, and I couldn't get in. I asked the lady. Gabe's had a person sitting downstairs on like a bar stool, and then you had to go up these stairs to where the stage was in Gabe's, and it was this old musty place with like low ceilings and all this stuff. But anyway, the ladies, no tickets, you're not getting in. So I had a $20 bill in my pocket, and back then a 20 maybe meant a little something more. So I gave the lady 20. I said, put this in your pocket, but let me the F upstairs. And she said, you're in. So I went upstairs. I stood on a chair in the back, and I saw the entire set. And there's like bootleg copies on the internet and all that stuff. But some of the things I've seen in like the Daily Iowan and some of the old archive stuff said Smashing Pumpkins at Gabe's in July of '93 is one of the best, most raucous shows ever. And I was there in the back. So
Wow.
bribed my way in with a $20 bill. That's my story.
That's incredible. You definitely got me hooked on Pumpkins to that. I wish I would have been able to get to that show, but I didn't know they exist probably at the time.
And I got to add this. I met my wife in Iowa City. She was a Pi Phi. Brian was at our wedding. He knows Sarah well. My wife is from Des Moines, and same year as us, but we met in '93, and now we got married in '97 in Des Moines. Like I said, Brian was there. So we're coming up on 28 years in June.
Wow.
But actually, funny thing, because Brian knows this, and I told Nick this earlier, but for some stupid reason, I continue to do CrossFit, and so does my wife and our youngest daughter. And I think I've been doing it 14, 15 years now, and that's probably why my knees are so bad. But anyway, I was in there the other day, and I was just doing some cool down stuff, and I was leaving our CrossFit gym just not too far from here, and there was a guy in there with I saw he was wearing some black Nike shorts and had a yellow Hawkeye on it and had the Nike swoosh in yellow. I was like, that's weird. You never see Hawkeyes down here hardly at all. So I was like, hey man, you a Hawkeye? He's like, absolutely. You? I was like, absolutely. So he ended up playing for Ferentz. His name is Josh Turner. He played, I think he said, in maybe 16, 17, 18. I think he said he was there for 2 years, but he's from down here, American Heritage High School, and was a cornerback or a safety, and played for Ferentz for a couple of years. And then I think he said he transferred to Florida International and ended up there. Cool seeing another Iowa Hawkeye football player at my gym. And So of course we were talking about Iowa City and Ferentz, and and he had a lot of good things to say. So pretty cool running into the Hawkeyes randomly like that, though. I'm sure you guys too. Nick probably runs into lots of Hawkeyes out in California, but Brian and I don't see too many down here in South Florida.
We see some fans here and there, but not too many players.
So
I had one more question. When you joined the fraternity, was that a problem at all? Did coaches have any issue with that, or I never?
You guys remember, I think, I don't know if there was any policy or protocol, but you remember kind of Greek life was frowned upon, but a lot of guys on the team joined some of the black fraternities. And my dad was an SAE at Florida State when he played football there. My brother was an SAE at Florida State. I always thought it was something that I would do, but I remember once I got to Iowa, it was frowned upon. But after my second year, I just thought, what the heck? And I don't think we needed permission or anything, and it wasn't like Animal House or anything, but I decided to join. And then you might have come to a couple of parties. I know Slutzker did, and Derek Price did, and my brother Chad, he was a punter at Kansas State, came up and came to a couple of our parties. And my youngest brother Ryan, who punted at Clemson, he came up, and it was fun. I've got a lot of good friends still that were in the Pike House. The Pike House, we had a great house out there. Is that Dodge Street that runs out toward Mayflower, toward the interstate? I can't remember.
I know, I should know. I grew up in Iowa City, but it's the one that runs out to Iowa Interstate.
It goes out by City Park and right along the river, and then out by Mayflower, and then you hit I-80. But anyway, we had a great house. You took this like winding driveway up. So the Pike House was up on a hill, had this huge deck out back, and it overlooked the Iowa River and City Park. So it was cool. We had fun, but it was something to do. But I even remember our Hell Week was right after spring ball. I guess it would have been spring ball in 93. Maybe it was 94, because I joined a little bit later, but they accommodated the fact that we had spring ball, but because I was joining the fraternity, I still had to go through the pledge stuff and do the Hell Week and all that. We did the Hell Week for our initiation was like the week after spring ball, and you don't sleep and all that stuff. I do remember it was something funny, because one morning at 5 a.m, our pledge master, we all had to put on rollerblades, or maybe it was roller skates, and like the Iditarod race up in Alaska. So they had configured this water skiing handle with all these little side handles on them, and our pledge masters, gosh, maybe we had to run and then pull them on rollerblades through campus. But it was funny. We were like a bunch of mushing dogs, like running through campus, pulling guys on rollerblades early in the morning. And then like people are going to class, and you're like, oh my gosh, so it was fun. But we had some fun parties and lots of good friends that I was in the Pike House with. So good.
There's one party I went to. I can't remember how many other ones, but
I think you came to the Pike House.
just a couple. Yeah.
Twice. They were always doing stuff, but
That's wild. We didn't really have that experience. I guess we probably went to a few parties.
I think it was frowned upon, but
they didn't say anything to you. You got to do that or not. Okay.
No. And again, the good thing is my fraternity knew that I was there playing football on scholarship. Whatever mandatory stuff they had, you couldn't do. And frankly, I used football activities as an excuse to get out of a lot of things for the fraternity, probably. But no, it was fun. It was just something additional to do. But you only go to college once, and they say it's the best years of your life, and it truly was for me. And I was just so many fond memories of Iowa City, and just, gosh, the time there. It was, you learned a lot about life, and you learned a lot about people, and you had a great time doing it. And I owe everything to my education, my time at Iowa, the fact that Coach Fry and the staff saw something in me to give me a scholarship. And that's why I feel obliged to give back. I met my wife there. I have a family. The career I have is it. I have a very strong family background, thankfully, from my parents. My mom and dad are my heroes, and they did everything to raise me and my brothers the right way. But I owe everything to Iowa. Met my wife there, and I have what I have today because when I was 18, they saw something in me. I didn't end up being that great, but I made some field goals, at least a few.
Quite a few, quite a few. Don't sell yourself short.
I was gonna say it's not.
But I'm being silly. But I think we all do to a certain extent. But I'm thankful every day for the opportunity I had and what it's led to, and that adding to the foundation I had already. Coach Fry, Coach Triplett, Coach Hendrickson, Coach Elliott, the other coaches we dealt with, our teammates, how supportive of an environment it was. And gosh, just how much fun we had. We freaking got to play Big Ten football. And there's not a lot of people that can say that. When I tell people where I went to school and that I played football at Iowa and I was a Marine Corps officer, most people are like, you got to play in like the big house and Beaver Stadium. I'm like, I might have missed some kicks there, but I got to play there. But how cool was it being in pregame warm-ups and like Joe Paterno's circling around the 50 and shooting the shit with you, and just legendary coaches like that. Not to mention that we all got to play for Hayden Fry. And you can tell anybody, whether they're an Iowa fan or even a college football fan, they hear the name Hayden Fry, they're like, I just remember that guy was a legendary football coach. And we got to play in these crazy stadiums and these big games. And obviously college football is much different now than it was then. But I tell people we played against Nick Saban when he was at Michigan State. They're like, what? How cool is that, though? The Paterno.
Being beat them too, right? I don't think we ever lost to them.
No, we beat them at Michigan State. And the Sabans and the Lloyd Carrs and all the other legendary coaches we got to play against. And it was always fun. We all got to be out on the field before everyone else. And some coaches were a little more warm and friendly than others, but I remember the old Minnesota Gophers coach, like early on, I'm drawing a blank on his name, but he was just like, it was almost
Jim Wacker.
He was so cool and so funny. And he'd be out there and we'd be in pregame warm-ups and he'd be shooting the shit with you and playing some mind game stuff, but at the same time was like genuinely interested in talking to you. It was like, dude, you have a football game to coach against us. But he was just like, he just seemed to love what he did. And it was so refreshing to see great times and great memories for sure. So
A crazy fraternity to be in, right? For sure. It's on a side note, it's interesting. I think I was so hard on myself that I literally watched the game like last week. I watched like a replay of a Michigan game. I think at the end of the game, I think I hit like a 54-yard punt to push them back, and then we ended up saving or winning the game. And I think I finally was like, all right, I did a good job there. I don't think I let myself have that back then. I'd have been like, oh, that 27-yarder that I had that was in the third quarter, I was still pissed about that. So it's interesting to think about that mindset and like how, I guess, and how fucked up it is to some degree too. But
it is. I mean, it's interesting you say that. You know, it's hard to think back to where we were when we were 18 to 23 years old. And obviously we have life experiences since then and have different perspectives and viewpoints, but I never really understood or appreciated how, and this may be cheesy to say, but I never understood or appreciated how critically important special teams can be in the complexion of a football game. Back then it was like, okay, we're marching down the field, we're in field goal range. I need to start getting ready because I may have to kick. And if we score, then it's going to be a PAT. And even for the short time that I punted, it was like, okay, it's fourth down. I just need to kick the ball as far as I can. If we're in the other team's 35 or 40 going in, I can't really kick it as far as I can. I need to try to place it and pin them inside the 10. But now when I watch football, college or NFL, I mean, seeing how a punt, watching Tory Taylor for all these years, Iowa won football games because of Tory Taylor. It didn't matter what else happened in the rest of the game, whether offense was good, bad, defense good, bad. Tory Taylor could literally change the complexion of the game by a punt. And solid special teams. We've had really good kickers the last few years that, like, you're like, man, that's
Incredible
a tough
kickers.
kick. It's freaking raining at Nebraska. It's cold. It's windy. This is a 48-yarder to win the game.
Yeah.
We hit it.
Nails it.
On a walk-off. And I'm like running around screaming. Everyone's like, what the hell's wrong with this guy? And I'm like, F yeah. So whatever. But no, I didn't really have an appreciation for how important it is, because when you're in the moment, you're just kind of like, all right, it's my turn to perform. I need to go out and do it. But you're not really thinking like what this means in the trajectory and progression of the game. You're just thinking, I need to go out and I need to punt it as far as I can. But even seeing some of the old tapes, some of Nick's punts, when you're inside when we're on our 5-yard line and it's late in the third quarter and it's a tight game, and Nick would get off one of those boomers, and while the ball's in the air, you can hear the crowd recognizing, all right, he hit a boomer, and then he puts them back on their 30-yard line. Now they got to go 90 yards instead of it being one of those 35-yard cheesy punts, and they got the ball on our side of the field. When I watch football now, it's almost eye-opening, because I did not have that perspective back then when I was going through it. Same thing in high school. I was just worried about my average in high school. How far can I kick it? Oh, shoot. It went in the end zone. It's coming out to the 20, but at least I'm padding my average. So it's interesting that you say that, Nick, but solid special teams play. Not obviously having a kicker that's prolific and can make everything, but I had always underestimated the importance of the punting game, and until watching football in the last few years and just having this appreciation for literally how critically important it is. And even when I watch our games and there's 2 minutes left and the other team has had a couple of big plays on our defense and they got time on the clock and they got 3 timeouts, and our guy, you pin him inside the 5 and you're like, oh, thank God, they got to go 95 yards. It's never going to happen in 2 minutes. Even with 3 timeouts, we're going to win. And then there's a touchback and it comes out to the 20 and you're like, damn it, they're going to be in field goal range and 35, 40 yards. They got a shot. We're screwed. So it's funny how you live and die with special teams, and especially punting. It's just funny how your perspective kind of changes over time like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, same for kicking too, right? You hit a 50-yarder, then you get put points on the board, and you don't give them the ball at the midpoint too, and the kickoffs. If it's a good return man, you'll take a 20 out of the 20 to get it through the end zone.
Right.
That's quite dynamic part of the game and interesting, like the swings of it, right? It could do that. We talk about the onsides, just that dynamic of play of someone could grab it, run it back. You could get the ball back. You could get the ball at the 50-yard line or whatever it is. It is wild.
And I don't know what it is, but obviously things evolve and things change. But gosh, you look at both college and NFL kickers these days, and for the most, especially the NFL guys, but these guys are they're almost automatic. And the NFL punters, just the way they can flip the field and change momentum is unbelievable. It didn't always used to be that way. NFL kickers have always been good. There's always been good college kickers, but you see these guys today, and
it's another level.
These guys coming out, like, it's not like they're physically stronger than they used to be. They're using the same footballs. They're still kicking off the grass and the turf, but these guys are coming out, and it could be a 58-yarder to win a NFL playoff game, and these guys are hitting them with 10 yards to spare like it's nothing. That didn't used to be the case, you know? And
they're even getting they're like, oh, he missed a 58 and they could have tied the game. And there's like, dude, that's a 58. That's not a gimme, but even anymore, it's almost like
and even
anything outside 60, they're like, how did you miss that?
Even some of these college guys are hitting walk-off 56-yarders like it's nothing, and kickoffs booming through the end zone, whether there's wind in your face or not. It's just the leg strength and the talent is unbelievable, but it's fun to watch these guys since we're kickers and punters. It's a different level, and it's cool.
And even with the systematic changes of the game too, right? The goalposts getting skinnier and the backing up the PATs and all that stuff, right? The balls in the NFL. There's all these things they're doing to kind of mess with that still really doesn't parity of it.
I know the NFL kickoff, it's an interesting change, but kickers still play an impact there if they can get a touchback. PATs in the NFL have obviously become a little bit more of an adventure, especially if there's weather, but man, these guys are so good. It's fun to watch. Just the elevation they get on the ball. It's pretty astounding.
I keep saying we would never play. If we were playing coming out now, like we wouldn't be, I wouldn't even get scholarships.
And I wonder because again, it's nothing mechanically different. It's nothing strength-wise different. I don't know. Maybe there's a secret sauce, but you look at the prolific NFL and college kickers back when we played, and just the talent level now, you would agree. It's a totally different level of just these guys. Nothing. Back in the day, trying a 50-yarder plus in the NFL, it was statistically the
50-50 shot,
maybe a 50-50 shot, and a 50-yarder has become like a chip shot in the NFL, and even for certain college kickers that have been around. And so it's interesting to see that physical evolution of these kickers. But man, these guys there must be something about just teaching these guys how to generate torque or something. But Justin Tucker and Butker and some of these other guys, it's fun to watch, and it's astounding how good these guys are and what kind of leg whip they can get and what kind of force and energy they can generate into a football. So
I think like one game is like 58, and then the other guy hit a 59, and then the other guy came back and hit 57 to win it.
And you're just like,
what in the hell?
What is going on? What am I witnessing here?
It feels like I guess if you would ask me, I guess you haven't though, but it feels like the attention paid to that has changed too. It's like LeVar Woods is a special teams coordinator. Like he's got a title, right? He's got a top title, and I think there's the mental aspect, I think, that wasn't as prominent back when we played. The athletes have just gotten stronger and faster and all those things. So that probably makes sense too. I think just the attention paid to it in practice and the game is just different, right? It was before it seemed like some of the specialists, and that was just not an afterthought, but wasn't like okay, this is something we're going to spend a lot of time on to give us that upside, I guess.
Did you hear the one with LeVar that we put up a couple weeks ago? He's saying that now they've got video analysis and they can measure all these things on the ball and with all the kicks and stuff. It's pretty fascinating.
I mean, they're doing that at Iowa with the kickers and punters.
Yep.
Like this
they're using like baseball
device,
just drilling down into literally into data related to ball contact. That's crazy.
Rotations. They said they're starting to be able to measure like velocity and stuff like that, and just all kinds of stuff. And it's a lot more than a paper sheet with good and no good.
What kind of too, like you said, it was like the variable with the wind. They could tell if they hit the ball right, and then just if the wind pushed it or whatever. It was a lot of data, I think, and just a lot more seemed like more systematic kind of tracking and thought process of like how you look at a practice instead of just kicking a bunch of balls and saying, okay, the majority of those are good or bad. It's really drilling down small parts.
We've all heard that over the years. Baseball now, I mean, it's all driven with statistical probabilities. Brian, you've got a background in this stuff. It's no secret to you, but look, golfers now are doing everything they're doing by the data, and one percentage angle with all the technology they have. But still, you wonder how that translates into kicking a football. But I guess if you study it enough and the data tells you how you're missing, why you're a little bit off, and you can fix that, that's pretty intriguing and fascinating that you can literally drill down that specifically with statistics and data to mechanically fix something like kicking a football. How interesting is that?
I suppose it's also the bar gets raised, right? If someone sets the bar here, then someone keeps setting it farther and farther ahead. It's
true.
I think about surfing to some degree, like off topic, but you see these guys back in the day that were like doing these crazy things. Now you're like, okay, that bar is like aerials and like all this other stuff that's like just the game has pushed, or the little skill levels have pushed that much farther, and like what people think they can do, right? It's someone's like, oh, I'm only supposed to make this 50% of the time. Now it's like, okay, you've got to make this 80% of the time. Then mindset changes, I think.
It's like a documentary on Tony Hawk. For years, he was trying to get like I don't know much about skateboarding.
360,
trying to get like the 980 or something, which is like 3 complete turns, and then the next guy was doing the 1080 with 3.5 complete turns, and now it's like a 1060 or something with 4 full. Same thing with like ice skating. Oh my gosh, this person just did 4 triple axles in an ice skating performance. So you're right. That's always going to be the case, but just from a pure physical standpoint, it's just it is crazy to watch. Some of these punters and kickers they're so good, they're just off the charts. Whereas you look at Pro Bowlers back in the day, the Morton Andersons, and great kicker, but NFL legend, Hall of Fame kicker, didn't miss a whole lot, but he wasn't going to come in and hit 350 plus yarders in a game in weather. It's just a totally different level.
Nice. I think that's pretty good. We hit a lot of topics, though.
Kept you a while. Thanks, Todd.
Appreciate it, Todd.
Appreciate you guys having me, and always good to see you guys, and hopefully see you guys in person before too long, especially at an Iowa game at Kinnick.
Let's meet up.
All right. Well, I appreciate you guys having me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks, Todd.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Todd. Appreciate it.
All right. We'll see you guys.
All right.
Cheers. Thanks.